समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Thuingaleng Muivah at 91, the longest of the long marchers of Indian politics. I know that we have somebody older than him. We have L.K. Advani, we have Devagowda, not far or thereabouts. However, none of them is as active and as consequential in the national interest right now than Thuingaleng Muivah, because he still personifies the Naga insurgency, which has gone through many ebbs, many peace processes over time. One in 1966, which actually failed because Muivah made it fail. Then in 1975, there was a partial one in 73. I will take you through all that. One in 75. And then, since then, there have been negotiations going on between National Socialist Council of Nagaland, which Muivah heads, and also Government of India. This is backstop with a ceasefire agreement between the two sides. So nobody has fired anything in anger in a long time now. And Nagaland has generally been peaceful, however not fully lawful, because NACN runs its own independent camp, quasi-sovereign camp, Camp Hebron, and as it's called. Its cadres has swelled, meanwhile, from 2,500 to when Muivah came in to make peace to almost 6,000 now, because when easy income is available, where you can collect taxes or extort, whatever you want to call it, then it becomes a profession as well, and there is easy availability of weapons, particularly coming in from the Myanmar side. Although operationally, most of the work is done by his deputy V.S. Atem, who also read out a statement just a couple of days back on behalf of Muivah. Now, what is important this time? This is significant because formally, at least legally, formally, visibly, this is the first time Muivah has gone back to his village of Somdal in Ukhrul district of Manipur. He is a Naga from Manipur. He is not a Naga from Nagaland. He is a Thankul Naga from Manipur. Manipur has about 6 lakh Nagas, or 20% of its population, or all of it is an estimation right now because we haven't had a census since 2011. So he is a Naga from Manipur, a Thankul. He hasn't been able to go back there since 1964. Also, although there are rumors and there is folklore that he came in there in 1973, unknown to the army or intelligence or police organizations, anybody who might have been looking for him. 1973, Naga insurgency was active. No formal peace agreement had taken place, and he would have been a wanted man, and with a bullet coming for him, with his name written on it. However, we don't know if he ever came in 1973. If you count from 1973, it's been 52 years, but I would say 61 years since he left and went underground. He's come to his village for the first time. Now, immediately you will think that this is some kind of a return to normalcy. He and his people have also thanked Government of India for letting it happen. Government of India also is letting it happen, one, because he's a man who's been at peace with the government, who's carried on the negotiations, but they also think that if they have to have the hope of fully concluding or putting into effect the framework peace agreement that Muivah and his people signed up with Government of India, and which Prime Minister Modi announced at an event on the lawns of his residence, 7 Lok Kalyan Marg, and he announced it with great enthusiasm with a public speech to the gathering, which was telecast. Then they have to deal with Muivah, and they have to give respect to Muivah. Muivah went and spoke to his people. He got a very warm and very boisterous welcome in his village. He said, however, some really interesting things. He said, and he himself is not speaking because he's not in such good shape. He was helped along by 2 persons, each holding one of his arms. The speech was read by Atem. his deputy. And I will read some lines from the speech for you. One, India having lost its political will to implement the letter and spirit of the framework agreement, that is the 2015 framework agreement, is deliberately forcing Nagalim. Now, Nagalim is a concept that NSCN has, or that many Naga separatist insurgent organizations have had. Nagalim is the larger concept of the larger Naga nation, which is not just the state of Nagaland in India, but also what is seen as Naga territories elsewhere. That will be, say, the district of Ukhrul in Manipur, district of Senaput in Manipur, more territories in Manipur, some territories in Myanmar more significantly, because even when Muivah founded his group, NSCN, National Socialist Council of Nagaland, it was IM. IM is Isaac Chishi Su, who was a SEMA leader, SEMA commander, and M for Muivah. However, it soon got hyphenated with Khaplang. So another group of sort of southern and eastern Nagas led by a man called S.S. Khaplang, who passed away not long ago, that came up and joined hands with them, and that's how this became a more comprehensive insurgency along the Myanmar border. S.S. Khaplang was not an Indian Naga. He was born east of the Pangsau Pass in Myanmar, so fairly deep inside Myanmar, but he was a Naga. I'm explaining this to you because we need to understand the concept of Nagaland as Muivah and his people believe. They think that any territory in Nagaland, in Manipur, parts of Assam, some parts of Assam bordering Nagaland, and also Myanmar, which have a sizable or significant Naga population, is part of one entity. That's the reason demand he made at Somdal also was that Government of India should recognize Nagalim as an entity. Then, of course, he has his demands about a separate constitution and a separate flag, and he says those are not negotiable. However, he does not challenge the idea anymore that Nagas will be part of the Indian sovereignty. Within that, he has these demands. That's where the settlement is stuck for a very long time. Now, I might have my views on why this settlement is stuck, but this is not the place for me to give my views to you. I will only use this moment to explain to you the problem and also the challenges, and also where we started and through what the junctures through which we have reached this place, because that will make us understand how complex this problem is, how challenging it is, and also how important it is, and how much it is in the national interest that this problem, India's oldest insurgency, is settled. How old it is, I explained some of this in episode 304 of Cut the Clutter. That was in October 31, 2019. In fact, 6 years ago, almost to date, 31st October. I am recording this on 23rd October 2025. That was 31st October 2019. And you might find as I go along explaining things to you, if you're an old watcher of Cut the Clutter, you might find that there are some things that you've heard before or that I've described to you before. That is one that makes the point that this problem has festered for 6 more years, which in fact was 4 years after the signing of the framework agreement between the Modi government and NSCN. That's one. The second thing is, I would say, look at what I am wearing. Look at my shirt. Look at my trousers. I know that's a very, very unusual prompt for you. But please take a look, and please keep taking a look. Does it make you think about something? Then I will leave you with that thought, and I will unravel this puzzle for you towards the end of this episode. So please do stay with me. Staying with Muivah or Muivah's statement, in fairness, I will read the operative part of the statement. It said, first of all, as I said, that he thinks that Government of India has lost the will to honor the framework agreement in letter and spirit, and that, he said, is deliberately forcing Nagalim into the battlefield through betrayal and provocative divide and rule strategy. Now, what is he referring to by way of divide and rule strategy? Because government found that when they were not able to finally close this agreement with Muivah, and Muivah had made the separate flag and constitution a sticking point or a non-negotiable issue, government started dealing with other Naga groups, and they signed a separate accord with the other Naga groups. That also I will talk about as we go along. That is what Muivah is calling Government of India's divide and rule strategy. And then he goes on to say, and I quote, "However, we have the confidence and we are prepared to face any challenges and eventualities in the battlefront and at the negotiating table." So he's not walking away from negotiations. That be very careful. NSCN is committed to conclude an honorable and acceptable negotiated political settlement, and we are equally prepared to fight militarily. And that's why he says, I'm sending out this message to Nagas and the international community that India and Burma, he still uses Burma, not Myanmar, India and Burma may once again force Nagalim into the war of liberation and resistance against occupying forces in self-defense. Now, again, there are complexities here because he also sees that the war in Myanmar has become very chaotic. There are many groups, there are many Naga groups also, and there are many groups based on tribes, and there are many alliances of the tribes as well. Also, his partner Khaplang is gone. His group also has split in many factions. That is what he's again calling divide and rule, this time involving Myanmar as well. That said, as we stand at Somdal in Ukhrul district, see the map of Nagaland, see the map of Manipur, the bordering states, and Myanmar. That will make you understand who's where. So if you see Ukhrul or Somdal, which is next to Ukhrul, that is where if you position yourself there, if you position the tip of the compass there, and then see the situation around it. I have to take you back to the 1950s or 60s, at least 7 decades. This is a story of history, geography, and culture. This is an issue as political as it's cultural and ethnic. In Nagaland's case, I just began with geography, but then you have to come to the tribes, to demography, because Nagas are not one tribe. Nagas are anything between 25 to 30 tribes, each one with a dialect or a language of their own, and they talk with each other through a common language, which is called Nagamese. So Nagamese is Assamese spoken in a particular way. Usually, if you know Assamese, you can get by in any part of Nagaland or any population of the Nagas, because there is no common Naga language, and that is what also complicates things. That's also the history of insurgency is very complicated, because at different points of time, different tribal groups have made peace with Government of India and come over ground. For now, we are staying with geography. Again, look at the map of Nagaland. Nagaland doesn't border China. Nagaland did not border East Pakistan, but Bangladesh was East Pakistan, doesn't even border Bangladesh. So from where does Naga insurgency get access to weapons and support? In the past, in the 50s, the Nagas walked across the border into Myanmar, into what used to be Burma. If it is now very poorly governed, you can imagine what it was like in the 50s and 60s. So they took that route to go to China, or they found their way through Northeast into East Pakistan, and the Pakistanis obviously welcomed them with great love and affection, although the East Pakistani involvement was much greater with the Mizo rebels or Mizo rebellion that broke out in the mid-60s. The reason being that Mizoram shares a border with Chittagong Hill Tracts. Again, it is very porous now. You can imagine how porous it was in the mid-60s. So many of these groups and many of these leaders went into East Pakistan then, and God help. Then, in fact, the Mizo insurgency, the one big blow to Mizo insurgency came with the liberation of Bangladesh, because that is when they lost their sanctuaries in Bangladesh. Although you have to admire their guerrilla skills, that despite the army, Indian army chasing them, the Indian army knowing where they were, they still managed to escape almost intact to Burma at that point. And that is something that remained a sore point with Indian government also vis-a-vis Burma, that they allowed sanctuary to Mizo rebels who were going in. Nevertheless, Nagaland had access to China mostly through Myanmar. Then the Chinese stopped giving them support, and then various other things happened. Geopolitics of the region changed, particularly after 1971, and at various points of time, the Nagas made peace with the Government of India. As you go east on the map, watch Nagaland's easternmost districts. those districts border Arunachal Pradesh. That Arunachal district, say Tirap district or Tirap Vijayanagar area, that has population which is ethnically Naga. Ethnically Naga, although not resident of Nagaland. Those areas also, Muivah and his people might demand as a part of Nagalim. That it is from there that some of these ex-Khapla groups have been operating. And it's against these groups that some drone strikes have been carried out in the past. Some just about a couple of weeks back, and some a few months back. That also we had featured in a Katta Clutter episode. So that remains a separate chota mota insurgency, but these insurgencies are more smuggling come extortion rackets now. However, because these add to the larger sense of porousness and insecurity, these smuggling of arms, gun running, smuggling of drugs, smuggling of other valuable stuff continues almost unabated. Until the Second World War, not very much was known about the Nagas. In fact, there was a headhunting tradition. The Second World War brought the British. Remember the great Battle of Kohima? That's a beautiful and very touching cemetery for British soldiers who got killed in that battle in the defense of Kohima. That cemetery is laid out. The British, wherever the British came the Padris. So they brought in Christian preachers. Christian preachers wanted to convert the tribals. The tribals did not understand their language. So they developed Roman scripts for tribal languages. That is something that they did for Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipuri tribal areas, Meghalaya, everywhere. And the only part of the northeast the British pastors could not reach was what is now Arunachal Pradesh. One, because it was too distant at that point, and the colonial government had not even surveyed it properly. And second, after independence, Nehru got very insecure because he was dealing with the Naga insurgency, which he thought was led by English pastors. So there was a Reverend Scott who also became a key figure in negotiations that took place in that 50s, 60s period. And there was a great deal of insecurity that foreigners will come, foreign pastors will come and do the same thing to Arunachal as well. It used to be called Nefa then, and that's why under the influence also of Verrier Elvin, who was sort of Nehru's alter ego and resident anthropologist, although he was an amateur anthropologist. I also have in my shelf a book from him, Philosophy for Nefa, where he, although he was British, he counseled Nehru also to close off Arunachal Pradesh, or what was then Nefa, to foreign pastors or foreign priests. And that is one tribal population, one large set of tribal population in the Northeast, which by and large did not become Christian. However, the tribes that adopted Christianity also benefited because the pastors, one, converted their own languages into Roman script. Second, brought in a lot of literacy. Nagaland has almost 100% literacy now. Mizoram became 100% literate quite some time back. These benefits came to them, and then you've seen these tribes also further draw benefit from these because they've been in a better position to take advantage, that in a good way, take advantage of reservations for scheduled tribes in government jobs, government admissions, etc. Especially at UPSC. So you will find but small populations of Nagaland, tribals of Manipur, tribals of Meghalaya, Mizoram, Arunachal also punching above their weight in terms of their population. These are very small populations, punching above their weight in the UPSC numbers as well. Nagas, however, have a peculiar challenge. The peculiar challenge, as I told you, is that they are not one tribe. Naga is a generic name. Under that, several tribes come in. And those tribes, some are big, some are very small, microscopic. However, no single tribe is big enough to be even 20% of the entire Naga demographic. That's how nobody can be dominant. Now, in the 50s, starting late 40s, Zapu Angami Fizo, Zadef Fizo, he emerged to be the first leader of the Naga insurgency, and he founded the Naga National Council, NNC. That built a large army in the course of time. He was an Angami, and Angamis who've been the most dominant among Nagas politically, historically. They are also the tribe in Kohima, in and around Kohima. Usually when you say a village or a place, Kohima, Zakhama, Jotsoma, Chakabama, in that area, that will be inhabited by Angamis. However, the tribe that is most powerful politically now is Tangkhuls from Manipur. And the only reason for that is that they still have an active insurgency, and it is their leader, a leader from their tribe, who's leading this insurgency, namely Thuingaleng Muivah. What's the population of Tangkhuls? I'd say of the 6 lakh Nagas in Manipur, Tangkhuls will be about 3 to 4 lakhs, right? And the rest of them are many sub-tribes, the larger of them being probably the Mao tribe in Senapati district. From geography and demographics, we can shift to history. And history doesn't begin in 1947 or with the Second World War when the British came to Nagaland. There's been a history before that, and that was also a history of warfare among the tribes. After all, when the tradition of headhunting existed, they were not hunting the heads of outsiders or hunting the heads of Assamese people or the British outside or the Indian army under the British. No, they were having wars with fellow tribes, which led to headhunting, and heads were then brought back as trophies. That's a tradition that the British ended, very much like they ended sati elsewhere in India. Again, because we are staying with history, Fizo had brought with the British Army in the Second World War. He had helped the British Army. But on 14th of August, because he had become very aware of the changing geopolitical situation, on 14th of August 1947, a day before India's formal Independence Day, he declared independence for Nagaland. Obviously, India rejected it. Nehru rejected it. Nehru went to Nagaland in the course of time, tried to make peace with them, but Nagas did not receive him well. 1956, in fact, if we look back on these decades, 1956 becomes a very key year, because that is when the first armed insurgent attacks took place. A large garrison of Assam police was overrun and lots of policemen were taken prisoner. Nagas had a very good record of treating their prisoners well, as they did later when they shot down an Indian Air Force Dakota, which was supplying an Indian Army unit there. And they took the crew of the Dakota prisoner. There is a little Bollywood side story to this. The commander of that aircraft, Flight Lieutenant Anand Swarup Singha, was a brother-in-law of actor Devanand. He and all his crew members and soldiers on the aircraft were kept in custody by the Nagas, treated well, and released in very good shape. The 1956 outbreak, it also saw the first big Naga ambush. Nagas brought the art of ambush to independent India. In 1956 itself, they carried out an ambush on an army convoy in which 29 were killed. I think the entire convoy was wiped out. And a Naga ambush is a very unpretty sight. I should know because I saw the aftermath of one in February 1982 in a place called Namthilok on the road from Imphal, from the Manipur Valley towards Ukhrul. Just as you start climbing, that's where 21 soldiers of a Sikh regiment were massacred, along with their company commander, were all killed. Going back to the 50s, after 1956, we come to 1958. That again is a key year because that is when the law that today is debated all the time, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, that law was then enacted. In fact, when it was enacted, it was called Armed Forces Special Powers Assam Act. So this law was specifically brought in to deal with Naga insurgency in Nagaland and Assam, because Nagaland was then not a state, it was just a district, Naga Hills district in Assam. From 1958, we can come to 1960. That is when the Nagas had laid a siege around a large Indian Army garrison. That is the one that Dakota, flown by Flight Lieutenant Singha, was shot down. For the Indian state, it was a big loss of face. But the fact is that India did not have the wherewithal then. India could not have spared so much army then, and also logistics were not good. The roads had not been built. Nagaland was actually classical guerrilla country, thickly forested, mountainous, those days no electronic communication, and very distant from wherever the Indian army's big garrisons were. Then came the 1962 war. 1962 war, Indian army more or less left a lot of the northeast. They were not there in Nagaland as well. They came back. Nagaland was left actually to 2 battalions of Madhya Pradesh Special Armed Police. And that's why it's a big surprise to me that at that point, when Nagas under their command had 10,000 armed people, carrying AK-47 equivalent rifles. That's when Indian Army still had 303 rifles. Nagas actually brought in the first AK-47s or automatic rifles in this subcontinent. They decided not to then declare sovereignty and go away from India. Now, 1960s was a decade of, to use Mao's expression, talk, talk, fight, fight, because this is when Sarvodaya came in, Jayaprakash Narayan came in, some peacemakers emerged from among the Nagas also, and some peace talks started. In 1966, under Mrs. Gandhi, it looked like there'll be peace, but then somebody scuttled it. That somebody was a new assistant or aide that Fizzo had appointed, and that aide was called Thuingaleng Muivah, right? So now 61 years later, the same man still holds the key to permanent peace with Naga people, between Naga people and Government of India. All of this history going up to 1973, the capture, I'm putting it deliberately in quotes, capture of General, self-styled General Movo Angami, the chief commander of the Naga army, that took place in 73. I'm putting this in quotes because we don't know what kind of games were played at that time, because he came out with a lot of people. And then the 1975 Shillong Peace Accord, when the biggest of the tribes and the biggest leaders came out and made peace, mostly the Semas and the Angamis and many other linked tribes. But that is when Muivah decided to break away. He broke away with Isaac Chishisfu and said, this is nonsense. People who've signed this peace accord are traitors and I will fight. And he gave his organization a more socialist hue because he had been indoctrinated and influenced more by the Chinese communists. Now, the little history is that he called his organization National Socialist Council of Nagaland. And initially, I have somewhere in my archives the original printed and bound version of his constitution, which is white on a white base, National Socialist Council of Nagaland, printed in red color. So initially, because they were very communist, they burned some churches. Most churches in rural Nagaland were then made of thatch. When a few churches were burnt, they faced a pushback. The moment they faced a pushback, they amended their constitution. They said, we stand for a socialist Nagaland for Christ. That is something we have to understand if we want to get into the intricacies, of the Naga situation. At this point, Government of India wants peace. India needs peace and a settlement. But similarly, however much Muivah and his people might talk of going back and fighting, the fact is they've developed too many businesses, too many vested interests, and too much stability in their lives to go back to the bush and fight again. And also in Myanmar, if that is where you want to operate from, in Myanmar, the territory is already taken by too many rival groups. So they are not going to tolerate one more new or additional group coming there. So everybody knows, Muivah and his people also know that it's not going to be easy to go back to fighting. However, what they can do is to sustain uncertainty. How dug in their people are in normal life, I will tell you. His members, that is NSCN members, his armed soldiers, their families, their siblings, they are running successful businesses, not just in Naga and Manipur, but all over the country. They are running bars, salons, clubs, parlors. Many have become entrepreneurs and have set up their own businesses, restaurants, Naga food, for example, Naga artifacts, Naga food, Naga artifact. There are hotels and homestay businesses in Nagaland which are very popular. It's going to be very difficult for them to give it all up and go back to fighting, as was the case in the 60s, 70s and 80s for them. They have, in conclusion, as much of a stake in staying with India and finding their peace in a shared sovereignty as does the Government of India, as does any Government of India. And for the Nagas also, if they want to formalize this peace and if they've accepted the idea of a shared sovereignty, it's a good opportunity for them when they have a strong, full majority government in New Delhi willing to do just that. And now finally, the riddle that I had left you with. This shirt and these trousers. So see something on the other half of your screen, right? What do you see? That is our Karta Clutter episode 304. Very early days of Karta Clutter, October 31, 2019. See that shirt? See those trousers? Does anything look familiar? This is the shirt, these are the trousers. What does it tell you? It tells you how things remain the same the more they change. And you know what? Have you also had this experience that when you wear something for a very long time, you start liking the feel of it? Like with this shirt. I've had this shirt for more than 20 years. And see the state of the shirt. If you can see my column, you would say that it's a shame, right? It's so frayed. And every time I take it off and I look at the collar and I know how much more frayed it is, I think that now this must be discarded. And yet I keep it. One does in fact get attached to old things, even if they happen to be seen as disposable. In this case, however, this shirt and this pair of trousers is also a metaphor for how stationary and how unchanging the Naga New Delhi peace process has been for 6 years now. And you know what? Trust me, I did not plan this. I did not set it up. I just coincidentally, by pure coincidence, came to work dressed like this today. And then while researching this Cut the Clutter, I started seeing the earlier episodes. I saw 304. It is then that this shirt and this pair of trousers jumped out at me. So I thought this is something worth mentioning because we now have such a long relationship that I thought you might find it interesting. And if you want to understand the Naga situation in greater granular detail, I'd suggest you go back to episode 304, the one with this shirt and these trousers, and 555. I'm sharing the links with you, or go to the library and ask for some old texts. Just as Varir Elvin had a philosophy for Nefa, he also has the Nagas in the 19th century, which I find in my bookshelves.